Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Atkinson HR webinar on compassion fatigue. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're all in parts of the country or parts of your house where you're managing to avoid melting. I hope you've got ice cream to hand or an ice lolly. I'm Graham from Atkinson HR, so thank you for joining me. I'm going to introduce our panel in a minute, or I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. Just while we're doing that, so I'm just going to give kind of 30 seconds for a few more people to join the call. Please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. So if you could just tell us kind of who you are, what organization you are here representing, and what your role is, that'll be really helpful for the panel to get a gauge of who we've got on the call and what your kind of roles are, so we can pitch the conversation in a way that's going to be helpful. So yeah, if you can just add that to the chat, and then I will do introductions in about 30 seconds. Okay, great. We're going to get started then. So we're here talking about a really important topic, I think. We're going to be discussing kind of compassion fatigue. We're going to be talking about kind of when caring becomes too much and how you manage that in organizations. These sessions are quite informal. I know some of you on the call will have joined us before for one of these sessions. If this is your first time joining us, then thank you for coming along and welcome. Really appreciate you taking the time to spend an hour with us today. They're pretty conversational, pretty informal. We would love you to ask some questions. So we've got some things that we're going to talk through, but there's a Q&A function on the webinar. So feel free to click that Q&A tab at the top, on the top bar of your Teams, and then to drop in some questions, and we can ask those and share those with the panel. I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to ask our panel members to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with you, Anita, if that's okay.
Thanks, Graham. Nice to meet everybody today. My name is Anita. I'm the head of people experience at the Ramblers. My role looks after staff and volunteers. So we have about 100 staff and around 21,000 volunteers that our staff support to deliver our mission. Prior to the Ramblers, I've worked in various organisations, so tech, pharma, and a large part of my first part of my career was around the NHS. I'm a HR generalist. I love working across the whole employee life cycle, so recruitment, performance management, recognition, and exiting well. I really do believe in that corny saying, people are our greatest asset. I think everyone comes to work with different motivations and challenges, and that changes over people's lifestyle. And I think for us, as people leaders, it's all about creating the best environment for people to thrive and do their best work. So that's through our systems, processes, and a passion of mine, which you'll hear me talk about a bit later on, really good people management.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for the intro, Anita. Bo, can we come to you?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Bo Irapor and I am the founder and lead coach at Insightfully. So I work with a team of coaches and facilitators, and we work with organizations and individuals who want to lead differently. I think it's an understatement that we are in a period of profound change. And so we work with individuals who want to change their leadership styles. We work with organizations that want to build cultures of care. The organization's been around for 10 years. My background, I often go in-house as a head of people and culture to work with leaders, alongside leaders, to help them kind of upskill around things like building a culture of care and accountability, doing restructures, et cetera. I'm really inspired by the concept that the personal is the professional. I know there's probably a lot of discussion about bringing your full self to work, and the way that we understand that at Insightfully is that you bring your full nervous system to work. And the more awareness that you have around what your nervous system is doing, the better able you are to be inclusive, collaborative, to engage in sustainable contributions. So I love the work that I do, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm eager to talk about this topic because it's so important given how many pressures are in the workplace nowadays. So thank you, Graham, for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us, Bo. Sarah, would you like to do a quick intro?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Gosling. I'm now a consultant working freelance around charity strategy and board effectiveness. I've been in the voluntary sector for about 20 years now, and particularly pertinent, I think, to today is I've been chief executive for 3 organisations, running for about 15 years in that kind of role, and I've more recently been working with a lot of boards, working for organisations that are very similar to, so I'm scrolling down the list of kind of where you're from and things on the webinar. And so I feel I've got a lot of experience around people management, leadership, and the tendency that we have to just draw all the responsibility to ourselves, and how we perhaps mitigate and manage that. And I've had 2 points in my life where I simply just had to step away because I have become exhausted, and a lot of that has been driven by today's topic around compassion. Got a much better work-life balance now, and a whole self balance, as you say, Bo. I like that kind of concept of bringing our whole selves to work, and I think that's something we might talk a bit more about today. Thank you, Graham.
Amazing. Okay, thank you to all of you, and thank you all of you for joining this session to share your kind of insights and views with people joining the call. So you'll see from the chat bar we've got people from all different ranges of voluntary sector organisations in all different types of roles, and I would like to kind of start off by exploring a little bit by what, we use this term, it's in the session title around compassion fatigue, but what does compassion fatigue mean to you, especially in the context of voluntary sector? So Bo, if it's okay, I'm going to come to you first in terms of this. What does compassion fatigue mean to you?
The first thing that comes to mind is how you experience it, which is exhaustion. Just pure and complete exhaustion. And it's not a moment, though it may hit you at a particular moment where you're like, wow, I've given a lot and I don't think I have any more in the gas tank. But it's cumulative. It's something that happens over time. It's something that happens in small to big decisions where you are thinking about what's best for others, what's best for the group. And slowly but surely, you take what's best for you out of the equation because of what's needed at the moment. And so it's this slow but progressive process where you end up burnt out, not just because of the volume of work alone that you might be carrying, but because of the emotional cost of holding other people in their need, in their pain, in their crisis, and not having space for yourself to pause and ask yourself, what do I need? So that's what I think when I think compassion fatigue.
Okay, thanks, Bo. Sarah, what about you? What would you add to that in terms of how you understand or see compassion fatigue, especially within the sectors where we work?
I think for me, it means 3 things. It means normal, and that's rather scary in our sector. It means human, and I think that's precious. That being compassionate is something that we do for ourselves, we do for other people, we do for our organisations, and it's something that somehow we need to hold. But to do that, it means the third thing is it means a need to act. And to do so ahead of time so that we are ready to cope as organisations and individuals, and we help organisations and individuals take responsibility. I think that our sector is one of compassion is a really good thing, but somehow we're expected to have endless compassion for everyone and for all of our organisations, and it's a bit of a baffling balance. So I'm hoping today we might unlock some ways in which we can improve that balance and be better prepared.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Sarah. Anita, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I think looking at, for me, it's around where the weight of our work outweighs the recovery time. For me, that is the real crux of it. It's around, it's not around not having compassion or capacity. It's around where it's been eroded to the point that you're on zero. You know, your tank is empty, and because of the work we do, and our mission, you know, everyone that works in the charity sector, we're all doing some really great work, but it's endless. And I think there is this, you know, desire to just make the biggest difference. So what people do is often forget to put on their own oxygen mask. For me, that's what this is about, really. It's around building work environments where it is okay to stop and pause and put on your mask. And the fatigue is where that is, when the balance is out of sync in terms of either your systems, your processes, how you're communicating, or how you're leading your people, really.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And so a couple of you have talked about balance there. So this isn't that we, you know, we don't want people to not care, especially in our kind of environment in our organizations. You know, we do want people to care. We want people to be connected with the mission, what we're trying to achieve. So I guess the question is then, how do you get people to hold on to that and keep that, but without it tipping into emotional exhaustion as part of that, without it tipping into burnout? Again, have you got any suggestions? Have you kind of experienced kind of techniques or ideas around this that have helped? Sarah, I think I'll come to you first on this one if that's okay. But what have you seen anything, and what are your thoughts in terms of how you can try and achieve that balance that you talk about?
One of the things I thought about was having overt conversations. These things are going to happen in our sector, so how do we prepare for them? And I remember talking to a senior charity leader about her overt conversations that she hosted them with her team when, to start with, it was when they were approaching a crisis. They could see that pressure coming from a distance, and she would bring first her senior leaders together, but then there would be groups around the organisation. The organisation is about 70 people, that would talk about how are we going to handle this particular situation, how are we going to cope with it. And they talked about how the team would manage, how the organisation would manage, and how they as individuals would respond to those peak workloads and pressures. And I thought that just by the honesty of that conversation, they changed the dynamic of the challenge that the organisation was facing. And I remember taking that back into an organisation where I was working. It was much, much smaller, but still having that same discussion. And what then came out from that were two other things. One was about setting boundaries. So boundaries for you as an individual, what you would put into the workplace, and what you would bring in with you if you needed to. Boundaries for the organisation, and that became a really important conversation with the board and with the senior leadership team about the priorities of the organisation and what we would and wouldn't do. So we had overt conversations, and I just found that incredibly helpful. Boundaries, and then this kind of, what are the priorities, what will we do, but what won't we do? And I think as my career went on, particularly when I worked in the world of students' unions, the conversation that kept coming up was, if we're going to say we're not going to do it, how do we not do it? And I spent a lot of time around that as things got more and more pressured over time. I won't add any more to that because I suspect, particularly Anita, with your HR experience, you've probably got some really useful thoughts around that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. The bit that's my experience, and I've worked for basically all of my career within the higher education and voluntary sector. But again, my experience has always been it's much easier to figure out what you are going to do or what you are going to do to the list. But when you have conversations about what we're going to stop doing, Sarah, it's much harder, isn't it? People are a lot more reluctant to kind of agree what we stop doing. Anita, over to you.
Yeah, so for me, I think education is really key. It's not assuming that people know how to create boundaries. So for the last 3 years, we've really invested in running workshops. Every month there's a workshop on recovery, renewal or balance. So it's all around training people to put that oxygen mask on first through our training. The workshops have been things like sleeping well, how do you create boundaries, which I think is really important with hybrid working, where you, if my workplace is in the same place as where I eat, it's in the same place where I sleep, same place where I socialize. So how do we create boundaries? And having people come along together to those workshops and talk, I think it was really interesting that people have different boundaries. Like for some people, the 4 p.m. boundary is really important because they want to go and pick their child up. I've got another member in my team who it's really important for them to start at 10 because between 7 and 9:30 they're writing a book every day. So it's just really being clear on what renewal looks like for people so they can really deliver in their work. So I think it's all around the education and making sure we're providing people with the tools to create that renewal.
Amazing. Thanks, Anita. Bo, over to you.
So when I was thinking through this, I realized there's a couple of different vantage points that I have had the fortunate opportunity to be in to inform how I look at this. And I'm saying that because I think what I'll share is more structural and is perhaps a lever that people wouldn't consider. So at the present moment, I am an HR trustee, which has put me in the position to really collaborate with an executive director who's very passionate about making sure that the culture of care at the organization is fair and works. And one of the things that we've put in the competency framework is care, well-being, and sustainable practice. And what I'm finding is what this is allowing is a conversation at the board level, a conversation at the leadership level, and a conversation at the staff level around what does this look like? What does this entail? What does this mean? And for me, what I'm finding is that I'm able to engage in these conversations, being really explicit about what does it mean to participate in a culture of care, build a culture of care, and lead a culture of care. And as Anita was saying, there is training that's involved. I think part of the reason compassion fatigue happens is because without a policy environment or a structure, you go with personal sacrifice. You go with minute by minute decisions around what extra capacity you have to help another person make it through. And so what I'm finding really exciting about the work that I'm doing right now is it's bringing up those explicit conversations so that there can be really clear agreements. And what I'm really looking forward to is individuals, staff members who grow in that environment, who are able to say, actually, I learned how to have boundaries here and it was okay. And I learned how to articulate this. And I learned how to say, you know what you're asking for requires a sacrifice from me personally. Perhaps we can talk about what we can do organizationally. So this is kind of how I'm looking at things right now. This is the journey that I'm on. It's how do you use the competency framework to build out the learning experience, but also the conversations around this.
Perfect, thank you. And again, one of the things here then, so what you're talking about here really, Bo, is that shift from kind of the individual, so thinking about kind of how the individual experiences compassion fatigue and what they can do and what boundaries they might be able to put in place. But actually, I'm also quite interested in the organizational aspect of this. So what are the conditions that we're creating as organizations? What's the environment that we're creating? So again, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how organizations can address that in terms of the environment. You've started to touch on that, Anita, as well, in terms of kind of some of the training and some of the educational piece. But can you expand on that a little bit? What do you see as the role of the organization in helping to create that kind of right environment?
Yes, I think we've gone through quite a journey in the last 5 years. When I first joined Ramblers, it was quite a parent-child relationship between staff and management in terms of people wanting permission to take time off. So the last 18 months, we've spent a lot of time working with unions, working with the employee forum, doing workshops with staff as well, having folks looking at what policies and procedures would really support people so that their home life works, so they can really give their full time and work. So we've done a whole raft of policies around family-friendly policies. One of the biggest ones that's made a difference is our carer leave. So we've given people 10 days of paid leave to go and look after their families, whether it be their children or their parents. And, you know, I had a member of staff come to me and say, that was the best policy you've done. I could take my mum to hospital and really be with her while she's in hospital, rather than trying to check my email, so that when I came back to work, I was fully able to be in work. And I think it's around treating individuals as whole beings, not just what they're doing in work. So I think that's part of it as well. So creating policies and procedures that support people, not just in work, but in their whole life, I think is a really important aspect for us.
Thank you. Bo, what are your thoughts on this? What's the role of organisations in terms of getting the environment right?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be a focus on sustainable practice. So thinking about what sustains the contribution of our people. And as Anita was saying, then you start to look at things like, what can we do in the policy environment? I think another thing you can look at, and I think that Sarah was speaking to this earlier, is that recovery time. So when something is emerging, there are times of the year that are more intense than others. There are certain types of crises that you can make a plan for, and you can think through, well, what does recovery time look like? Either how do we have explicit conversations about this, and then you build that into your one-to-one conversations between supervisors and direct reports. So that's one kind of pattern of or rhythm in organizational life where you can integrate things. Or you can actually start to ask yourself, what are the policies that around rest? So not just looking at leave as this is like time off that people have, but looking at leave more expansively in terms of rest, recovery, as well as vacation time, et cetera. So these are, I think, kind of summing it all up, it's almost framing things a little bit differently. So focusing first on, we want people to be able to sustain their contribution here, and then understanding we're in a sector where that can be very challenging and quite difficult because of the pressures and the rhythms. And so what does that mean for how we look at rest and recovery, and how we look at it influences the policies we develop?
Yeah. Okay, nice. Thank you. Sarah, what would you add?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to pick up on a couple of things that have already been raised. So this parent-child kind of relationship, I thought was very interesting, Anita. And for me, I've certainly worked in a couple of organisations where there's very much been, once in my private sector time, once in my charity sector time, you as a senior leader are the parent, and you do everything, kind of create things for your child. And I think there's something about supporting individuals to take responsibility for themselves, so it becomes adult to adult. And how do we do that so that they take their holidays rather than me chasing? I must admit, in the voluntary sector, I've not had so many problems getting people to take holiday. But in the private sector, I used to have terrible trouble where I bought extra holiday when I could because that's what I wanted. So consciously thinking about that relationship, and I really love the idea that you've done some training around it, and that I'd like to find out more about that perhaps separately. The second thing is about family-friendly policies from a large organisation perspective. So when I worked in the banking sector, there were 80,000 staff, and there was enough kind of capacity for the family-friendly policies to really play out. And I must admit, the bank I worked for was at the forefront of applying family-friendly policies and equal opportunities policies for women and for people from different backgrounds and different situations. They had earlier paternity leave benefits than most of the sector did. And a large organisation can accommodate that. in a small organisation, we can put those policies in place, but if somebody's not in and there's a service to be provided, somebody else has to do it. Somebody else has to pick up those emails. And so how do we set the organisation up to be able to support that? And that's only something that's really occurred to me, I have to admit, to those of you working in the Students' Union world, since I've left that environment. I realised that we put all those policies in place, and from an HR perspective, that was a good thing, and we trained people how to use them, but then we didn't think through how the organisation would therefore flex to accommodate that. So I think there's something around that. And personally, I had 2 major bereavements when I was in the Students' Union world. And the first time, people were just amazing and kind of coalesced around it and covered everything. The second time was much more difficult because the organisation was so stretched. And so when I came back, I wasn't ready. I hadn't had my recovery, and I really struggled with that. And I look back now and I think, okay, that should have triggered a more conscious conversation. The third thing was an interesting point that kind of came out for me, was about leisure and recovery time, and what leisure means. And rest doesn't mean necessarily going and volunteering to do something else. Not being at work, but looking after a family or caring for my lovely elderly mother are lovely things, but they're all about continuing to give. So how do you find that restorative time? And I really like the writer piece that you suggested, Anita. I love writing, and I'm writing a book, but the book is not rest. Certainly not now. I'm into editing most. But what is rest is my morning practice of reading poetry and then writing a response. So that's a really kind of creative, it's outside everything else that I do. So recognising that that is now a giver, and that the book, I love it and I really enjoy it, but has become a responsibility. So it doesn't create that rest piece. And helping us as individuals understand that, but also helping the organisations that we're working in to kind of take that out. And we have to lead by example.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. I'm interested in drawing a bit on your experience. So you said you used to work in the banking sector, and kind of, so you kind of got that insight into a corporate world. Again, is compassion fatigue purely the property of the voluntary sector? Is it something that we see in public sector? Is it something, you know, how does that map out in terms of the corporate world and the private sector, based on your experience?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. When I first worked in banking, you were basically, your life outside work was not encouraged. And so I had a stunning example that my then husband was incredibly seriously ill. He was in hospital, and actually I look back now and I know I didn't know whether he would last that October half term. So that was a really serious situation. And I left work on the Friday. I just had enough time to say, I'm going to be off, put my out of office on, but I didn't do a handover. And that Christmas, I did my annual review, and I got absolutely slated for not doing a handover. But my boss knew that my husband was seriously in hospital, and it was a life-threatening situation. And so it was all my compassion and fatigue and kind of emotional exhaustion, but I was heavily criticised for that. And then I watched the bank respond to that over time and actually significantly change. And it wasn't just down to my line manager who kind of took that attitude. That was kind of the culture that we were at. Some years later, same husband in hospital, had major surgery, has recovered fully from life-threatening situation, but the surgery kind of solved the problem. And I thought, I have to go to work. But I went to London, and because I was working well away from home in Bristol, and I rocked up, and the director who I worked for at the time was an absolute bully. He was awful and was eventually dismissed for that. But he saw me, and there's something about family that mattered to him, and he sent me home. He paid for my taxi back to Paddington personally and sent me home because that's where I should be. And so I saw this kind of odd playing out in that kind of context of what was happening. But over time in the corporate world, they realise that they're losing talent because our culture is not encouraging people to stay. People were choosing to go and work in better workplaces. And particularly now, if I was still in that environment, I think you would find people making different life choices. And to attract and retain those people, there needed to be a different agenda. And so the HR and the people side of things that was going on in the organisations began to change really quite substantially. I think you still find incredibly driven people in that context, but now I've got a lot of friends who still work in a commercial or private kind of context, and they are making far more choices, and the opportunity to have a flexible working life either in the office or at home actually has been generally very helpful for people. So I think we're better at it in the charity sector, but I also think we've got an opportunity to be even more conscious, because compassion fatigue and burnout are definitely risks that we hold otherwise.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anita, Bo, Sarah, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback on the call. So if it's not your turn to speak, are you okay just to mute to see if you can close it off? Thank you. Right, let's move on then to talk about kind of early warning signs. So again, I'm interested to kind of get your input and your ideas about kind of how do we know? So again, we've touched on this a little bit already, but if, you know, we've got quite a few people on this call who are either working in people and culture or who are leaders or managers, what are the indicators? So how might we tell if people are starting to struggle with compassion fatigue, and what might be our opportunity to kind of intervene at that point? So Bo, can we start with you?
The first thing that comes to mind for me are the decisions, and whether the decisions you're making are factoring in others and are not being balanced against your capacity or what you need or what you're going through. I think the other thing as well is the emergence of fear. So if you're fearful around setting a limit, or fearful around communicating a need that you have, or you're fearful that if you don't show up in a particular way, that means everything else begins to fall apart, that tells you something about how your giving is replacing something in the structure. So that is a really important like warning sign, when you find that if you don't make certain emotional sacrifices or certain types of sacrifices again and again and again, that there's nothing else to make sure that things move forward. I would say the other thing as well is noticing when you are taking a lot of time away from things in your personal life. So you are rerouting kind of the energy that goes to your personal life into your work life. And that might look like, in many ways, asking others in your personal life to compensate and show up in spaces where you wouldn't normally need them to show up as well. So those are a couple of warning signs that I think of.
Okay, just battling with my mute button. Thank you, Bo. Anita, let's come to you next. Again, what are the kind of indicators here for managers or leaders? How might they spot that things are kind of getting to a place that they want to avoid?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? There are slight differences, but people are people. I mean, I was just thinking when you asked, you know, what are my warning signs actually? So one of the things as a leader is to always go, well, what do I do when I get stressed and I know I become high over functioning? I think I can't take time off. You know, it's like I just need to get through this and survive, and then it might be okay. So it's almost like putting yourself in the shoes of your team members. So I think for me, it's when, go back to the point Sarah made, but people don't take annual leave when they should. And I think it's really, it goes back to that education piece, that getting people to understand that's really a false economy. I think, Bo, you talked about having, you know, practice that really is like consistent rather than just ad hoc. So it's really having, for me, putting in things in place to make sure that the warning signs of your team members are obvious to you. So for example, you know, as a manager, I know if I get on a call with one of my team members, I can tell within about 10 seconds if she's off, because of just how she says hello, because I know her well. So I think a lot of the warning signs are around knowing your team members well. So it might be people say they haven't slept well. It might be that they say they've got headaches, or they take their camera off. So it's really knowing your team and knowing the different warning signs. They're not the same for everyone, but just being vigilant of the different ones in your team members.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. What would you add in terms of this point about spotting the warning signs?
Picking up on Anita's point, when do I see the warning signs? I lose my temper. I don't lose my temper very often. So if I'm fractious, it's a real evidence that I'm not coping, and it's usually to do with overstretching myself around caring about other people in an organisation. My resilience goes, and actually my health goes. So I might be a middle-aged woman, but honestly, I get outbreaks of teenage spots like you never know, and I know that's kind of an indicator that it's gone too far. Being less glib, I was really interested in the point about decision making that Bo made. I'm not a great sports. I love cricket, but I'm not a great football fan. But I've been really interested in watching how managers work with players who are playing for 90, 100, 120 minutes, and they pre-prepare decision making under stress, so that when they are physically exhausted, but they have to carry on, and of course the fans are there wanting and expecting a result, how are they going to pre-make that decision about the pass they'll make, or where they'll play a penalty? And I've kind of got into football because I've been really interested by that management decision-making framework, that coaching framework. And so we will experience times when we are stretched. It's going to happen because circumstance does that. How can we improve our decision making, our resilience when those situations happen? So what are those pre-conversations that we can have? And I've been playing with that in my own life. I've been playing with that with a staff team that I've been managing for the last couple of years. I've just finished that role. And just talking about what that means and spotting that in somebody else, their decision making and particularly their temper just going and going, hang on a minute, that's happened a couple of times now. What's going on in the background? How do we provide better support to that? How do we give you permission to say, this is going on, I need to step away? And so using those triggers, and people have been very good at being honest about what they are with me, that things are coming along the line, because I try to create a situation and the organisation and the board around me where it's okay not to cope sometimes, but it's not okay to do that in the middle of a board meeting. You have to work out how to do that and give the early warning signal so that doesn't happen in a further kind of in a more public context. So I guess there it's also about keeping people safe.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And it's part of what we're saying here then, in terms of, you know, if part of the role of the manager or the leader is about understanding the people and knowing what some of these triggers are so that you can spot those moments. So which is I guess a broader point around well-being, isn't it? And being able to support your team and know when are the points to step in, or what the right things to do at those times. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think just one of the things we've done is revamped our monthly check-in forms with the staff and managers. So every employee must have at least a connect and reflect meeting with their manager, and that doesn't have to it's a little bit about work, but a big part of it is, how's your well-being? The first question we ask is, how are you doing? What is going on? Have you had your, and the second question is, have you had your breaks? Do you need a break? And so that is just part of the system we have now, and I think that's made a big difference to people in terms of giving them permission to say, actually, this is what's going on outside of work, or this is, Yeah, I need to book my holiday. Thanks for reminding me. So I think it's having line managers equipped to do good line management through the tools and resources you give them, really, to manage their staff.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Anita. There's a really interesting point from Aaron here on the chat. So Aaron's made a point, which is, so we've talked quite a lot about managers and leaders and how you kind of support them and the role of the manager. I think Aaron's point here is, for some colleagues that you might not have that relationship with the manager, or you might be at a level where you can't always be asked to seen to ask for help. And Aaron's talked in the chat around reciprocal mentoring or those opportunities for kind of peer support. Again, I'm interested in your views around this and the role that kind of peer support might be able to play, or reciprocal mentoring in the way that it's framed there. Bo, do you mind can I come to you first on this one for your thoughts?
Yeah, so this makes me think of a culture playbook that I worked with a team to put together before. And in that, we put questions that you can ask others when you think that something has changed, or when you're noticing they're bringing less energy to work, or you're noticing that their mood changed. So what we found in that team that I was working with and in their organization is that people wanted to be able to provide that type of support, but they were very conscious of the hierarchy in the organization, people's comfort levels with different types of people kind of asking about how you're doing, et cetera. And so the culture playbook elevated the conversation, in meaning that it made it transparent that this is something that the organization as a whole was invested in solving and standardizing in many ways. And so that made it easier for peer support to actually happen, but to happen in a way that was conducive and productive. Because the other thing that can happen without these kind of guardrails is you can end up having, I'll just call them like pockets of, I'll call it like low energy within an organization that never actually gets worked out because people don't really have guidance around how do we move from surfacing what we're feeling to taking a sense of agency around it and finding solutions to it. So that culture playbook was built to try and solve that. And I think it had a really good impact for that team and that organization.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Bo. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
I think my first thought is it's a brilliant idea, Aaron, and I want to take that away and explore it a bit more. I've seen reciprocal mentoring work incredibly well in the university context, and the hierarchy within the university, learning to trust it and engage with it and to think about it and to meet people who are very different from them to get an insight into their experience was absolutely fascinating. And how we use that in our organisations to create trusted places where you can have conversations so it becomes people support people rather than it always having to be the manager. I think it's very important that we help our line managers understand their role and provide them the tools to do that. Some people do it really naturally. Some people, it is a harder thing for them to do. And that's just because we're different. And there are some people, and I'll put my hand up to that, who spend so much time concerned about people and individuals that creates my own challenges because I take that home and I step too far into their world and become that parent-child that we were talking about earlier, rather than enabling them to take their own decisions and kind of place the responsibility. So I haven't got an answer for that, Graham, but I think it's a really interesting idea, and I'm going to take that one away and have a think about that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sarah. Anita, what would you add?
Yeah, I really like the idea of peer mentoring. But if we go back to, it's really interesting, it's like there's something around psychological safety if someone feels unable to go to the manager. I'd almost want to look at that. That's where my brain's going. What is it that the environment is such that people feel worried about doing that, or is a concern because they shouldn't be? I think I'd want to address that first. But in terms of peer support, I think that's a brilliant thing. I think rather than, it goes back to what we talked, Sarah and I touched about, that parent-child relationship, and really enabling people to support each other. So we have a channel for all staff, and the questions that get asked on there are amazing, and people go, I don't know how to do this, and someone will say, hop on a call and I'll show you, or I'm stuck with this. It's been enlightening for managers, because it's just taken all this work away from them, rather than assuming it just needs to be the manager. People are just helping each other or acknowledging each other on this chat. So I think that peer support is a real opportunity to really create an environment where everyone is a leader, or everyone is empowered to make a difference for themselves and to others as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We're coming to the end now, so we've got a couple more questions before we kind of think about wrapping up. So again, I'm interested in we're going to move towards the so what. I'm keen for people on this call to take away some practical kind of ideas. So we've talked about kind of well-being initiatives. We've talked about training and education. I'm keen to just kind of source any more ideas from your suggestions in terms of what people can practically do in this space that's going to help in terms of some of the things we've talked around kind of barriers, boundaries, education, resilience. I always get slightly nervous kind of talking about resilience, because I think different people have different understandings about what we mean by resilience. But can you kind of share some thoughts in terms of how organizations or managers or people in kind of people and culture space can help to get towards a good place on this? We'll start with you, Anita. That's okay.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's made a big difference to me, and I think my teams, is we introduced something about 2 years called the check-in. So every Monday morning I have a check-in with my leadership team, and all we say is what we bring to the table. There's no talk about work. It's a half-hour call, because I know Tom's son won a football match, or he's lost a match, or I know what he's bringing to the table. I know, so-and-so has done a run, and it's just brilliant. And then alongside that, I have another check-in every week with my own team, and that's great as well. So again, it's half an hour on a Thursday morning, not allowed to talk about anything other than what are you bringing to the table. And we talked, and in January, somebody mentioned about what they were doing for recovery. So actually, each week, we just say, we've all said what we do for recovery. So we ask, have you done your recovery thing? And Catherine in my team, she has weights next to her table. And she just lifts her weights in between meetings, and that's her recovery. So we just go, have you done your weights today? And it's just creating that lightness and that connection. And I think if people feel like they're valued as a whole person, it just changes everything, really. That's mine.
Thank you. Thanks, Anita. Bo?
I was actually thinking about my team at Insightfully, because we're coaches and facilitators. And so this is the world we live in. And therefore, you think we'd all be very good at like boundaries and limitations, etc. We are also quite a neurospicy bunch as well, which adds in some interesting dynamics. But I would say one of the things that I've learned to practice, because I am someone who my leadership style has always been, I'll absorb. And so I've really learned to lean into, let me discuss what I'm thinking about absorbing, because perhaps I don't need to absorb it. And that has been a real game changer for me. We recently, as a team, had to make a really tough values-based decision around an engagement. And typically, I would go into protective mode, which means that I would absorb everything and instead, I talk to each individual separately, then we talk together as a group. And so I found in that situation that not only didn't I absorb, I didn't absorb what I thought I needed to, but it ended up being quite a skills building exercise for us on how we make decisions under stress in alignment with our values. And so I came out of it really excited about the collection of people that I work with. And that was such a wonderful, unexpected treat of saying, you know what, let me not absorb. So that's something that brought to mind.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bo. What about you, Sarah?
I love that thought of not always taking responsibility. I remember a board chair who I worked with saying to me, I didn't have to be responsible for everything in a meeting. It was permissible for me to allow trustees or key members of my leadership team with the professional skills to take that responsibility. And meetings for a long time after that improved significantly because I just held it more lightly. So I've got two things. My coach, who I've worked with for a number of years, who was amazing, continually talked to me about holding things lightly and really got me to dig into what does that mean? What do I need to take responsibility for and have a plan for? And actually, like this board situation, what can I allow others to share that responsibility or take that responsibility for? But it probably took her a year to get me to really absorb what that meant and how that would change my behaviour, my mindset, my energy and resilience levels. It was so worthwhile. And I've used that with my family as well. What's my responsibility, but actually what do they need to take responsibility for? Not so much the children, most of them are adults now, but actually kind of my brother, my mum, those kind of things. So that's really interesting. And so this idea of board expectations is the other side, is setting a culture. So a lot of people here will work with boards in different contexts, I think. And so having a holiday and saying, I am on holiday. So they don't expect you to be available. Crises may happen, that's slightly different, but you don't do your email when you're on holiday. You set those boundaries. You have a non-working day, and that is a practice. Thursdays are my non-working day. If I have to do something on a Thursday, normally it's being a trustee rather than working, but if I have to do something on Thursday, that non-working day moves. So if you ever get my out of office, you may well get my non-working day this week is Tuesday because I shifted that. And I have that quite relentlessly. And I've asked my husband to hold me to account for that, because if I don't, then I become fatigued in the many ways that you might use that word. And the other board expectation, which builds on this kind of email idea, is trustees will email at all times of the day and night. I have one who tended to be a night owl. That's how he works. But that's not how I need to work. So I would say to them, the earliest I will get your email is at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I might have other things to do, but you won't get a response until the end of that working day. If it's really important, I will reply that next working day, assuming I'm not on holiday, of course. But setting some of those practices and boundaries, and then encouraging my team to do that. And so the kind of the tip, I guess, is about the role modelling of the behaviour and then honouring it. And so then not expecting, well, I've sent an email. People would ring me up and say, I've sent you an email. It's like, well, I'll get to that. It's an email. If it was really, really urgent, you should have rung me in the first place. But kind of setting some of those boundaries and things. And I think the other thing is that we are allowed to have fun in our workplaces. Sometimes we can be over serious about working in the charities that we work for and the causes that we're supporting. And some of them are really, really tough. But actually, laughing sometimes is a good thing. And I loved it, Graham, earlier, you laughed at something and it just kind of, and then Bo and Anita, I could see them smiling back and you get that response. And I think those things are important as well. There are good things in life. The work we do is good, remembering that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to come back to each of you in a minute to ask you to kind of give one kind of closing message whether that's a tip, an idea, a reflection that you want to share with people on the call. Just before I do that, just to share kind of some of what I've heard, I think so. It's been a really interesting conversation. I think what I'm hearing is we want people to care, right? We work in organizations, we work in an environment where it's great that people care about the work. It's great that people are invested and connected to our mission. And I think what I've heard is a couple of lenses to view this through. So one is that individual lens, which is how do we make sure that individuals understand kind of and have clear boundaries, that they're empowered to talk about kind of challenges or when kind of they're tipping into kind of compassion fatigue territory. How do we make sure that people have the skills and tools to be able to understand what their triggers are around this? And then what I'm hearing is also there's a lens which is, okay, what about the culture? What about the environment? So how do we create the environment and the tone across our organizations where people understand it's okay to care, but actually there've got to be sensible limitations around that in terms of how that works for us. I think it's interesting because it's also a deeply individualized thing, right? When you think about people's personalities, I'm a big believer that our weaknesses are often our strengths overdone or done at the wrong time. Some of our colleagues, again, I think a lot of our colleagues in the voluntary sector will be very empathetic. Empathy can be an absolutely fantastic quality in terms of helping you understand others, connect with others, to read how other people are feeling. When it's overplayed or overextended, and being very empathetic can also mean that you carry the weight of other people's emotions on your shoulders. So I think thinking about how we support people with that is really important. So I guess one of my takeaways, the other takeaway I'm taking from this, Sarah, you used the expression very early on, this is all about overt conversations. So how do we make these conversations quite open and clear around what healthy boundaries look like within our workplaces? I'm going to shut up now because you've not come to hear me talk. You've come to hear Anita, Bo, and Sarah. So I will start with you, Anita. Can you share one kind of closing reflection or tip for people? 30 seconds you've got.
Yeah, okay. I think self-compassion is not selfish. I like always look at authors. So Kristin Neff said that people who treat themselves with the same care they offer others are actually more resilient over time, not less committed.
Lovely. Nice. Bo, what would you share with people as a final reflection?
Yeah, so compassion fatigue is not inevitable. There are ways to design the workplace so that it can be reduced, it doesn't show up, etc. And taking the time to think in terms of sustainable practice. What does it mean to build, participate in, and lead a culture of care? I think is a framing that can help with building policy environments where compassion fatigue reduces.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Sarah?
I think remember the great things that we do. Remember that there is fun in life, both in our workplace and in our other parts of life, and capture that and just bring ourselves back to that sometimes. And ultimately, why do we do what we do in the first place? I find that really encouraging to reflect on that sense of purpose, not of our organisation, but for us. Why do we do it? And if we can start from that place of purpose, a lot of other things then become worth all that effort to make sure that we are looking after ourselves and we're looking after our organisations, and we've got that resilience and ability to cope.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. So a couple of things for me to say as we close out. So firstly, a massive thank you, Anita, Bo, Sarah. Really enjoyed hearing your kind of reflections, your wisdom, and I think people on the call will have taken a lot from that. Thank you to everybody who's joined. Again, just to let you all know, we run these webinars throughout the year. So every month we have a free webinar with a similar format to this that people are able to join. Our next webinar is around inclusive leadership, and that's on the 24th of June. So please do join that. I hope you've enjoyed it today, and take care and enjoy the rest of the day. Hope you manage to enjoy the sunshine. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a good week.